Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. All right, we'll get started then. So thanks for joining. And so this week we are going to talk about fear. So that's probably at least a familiar topic with some of us. But we're going to really unpack it, explore it, and get a sense of what we can do with it, how we can use it, how we can overcome or fear by actually embracing it. And in a way, the idea of embracing fear, it seems a little contradictory in the sense that I would not want to embrace a porcupine, because generally the perception of fear is that it's something to be avoided. It's something we want pleasure, we don't want fear. And so I just want to kind of start off this discussion by sharing a video that hopefully you'll like, it might resonate. So give me a second while I set this up. Okay, and you can see the screen. Okay. So, oh, 1 second. So, sometimes just like that scene, fear can come on us in a very unexpected way. But I just would like you both to share, what was your reaction to that video?
I thought something, not like something like this will happen. I thought of accident maybe.
Oh. But what were you feeling when it happened?
Fear, of course.
Like, what did you perceive? You know, did you perceive something in your body? Was it more like purely on an emotional level, or?
For me, I think it's blank for that moment.
Oh, wow. Okay. What about you, Vedant?
I don't know, like it was scary that I accept, but I don't know what happened in my body. I can't figure it out, but it was like hairs were standing.
So let's try this. Let's watch it. And this time just be a little more attuned with how your body is reacting. And to be just totally open and honest, I've seen this video several times and it still scares me, even though I know exactly what's going to happen. So this time let's watch that video, and then let's really pay attention to how our body is responding, as well as our feelings around that. So just give me a second, and I will subject you to that again. All right, let's do this. Okay. So what do you think? At least for me, I felt a little bit of tightening, you know, like my
like shaking, maybe something. Like immediate reaction is just like.
And the interesting thing too, it's an assault on both the sense of sight as well as the sense of hearing. I'm imagining without sound, it would also be still startling, maybe a little scary, but it was that combination. So if we look at fear as a kind of like alarm of something's not right, there's a kind of danger, and then we're getting those signals that prompt a fearful response from sight, from sound, it's going to elicit a stronger response, because our 5 primary senses, that's the way that we interact or engage with this world around us. And so we're relying on the sense perception to understand what is worth being fearful of and what is not. And so it serves a very useful purpose. So fear is that alarm or that alert to say something's not right, in the sense I'm perceiving a potential threat, either to me as this body or me as this concept, in the sense of the idea of who I think I am, or there might just be pain or something unpleasant is the main idea here. And when we talk about the word fear, that's a very broad word. Like there's different levels or grades of fear. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again to share our good friend, the, oh, and by the way, Vaishali, could you spotlight me? I just want to make sure that all this gets recorded properly. So I'm going to open up and share our good friend, the feeling wheel. And you'll see that that fearful section occupies a whole other area, not quite as big as angry, which is what we looked at last week. But fearful still is a decent sized chunk. So we have a realm of scared, anxious, insecure, weak, rejected, threatened. And so we could make the, and then even further down are a little bit of possibly some basis for that description of a situation or an emotional state as fearful, exposed, helpless, overwhelmed, worthless, insignificant. So some of them relate more toward, we'll say, an absolute sense of terror, but the basis of it might be different. Could be fearful for more a helpless or position of not identifying with strength. And so there's a whole spectrum of what is fear. And so we're just going to talk about fear in multiple levels, and hopefully what we're going through today can be addressed throughout, can address the entirety of what we bucket under the term fear. Okay, so I'll stop sharing. So when that fear alarm strikes, our body and mind respond in a certain way. Some ways to classify it are the fight or flight. For the purposes of this discussion, we're going to look at it though from a slightly different bucketing system, which is the bury it, run away, freeze, or panic. And then also there's different types of fear. Ones that many of us would either characterize as rational fear or fears that are more irrational. And when I was doing some preparation for this talk, I looked up there are websites that have a list of phobias or fears from A to Z. And some of them are quite interesting. More understandable things like a fear of heights to a strong fear of crossing bridges. Or there are some people that get anxious or even terrified of being in open spaces or in very confined spaces for a variety of reasons, or even just a fear of water. And so when we're talking about rational versus irrational, we can look at it this way, that rational fear, and keep in mind that the understanding of rational versus irrational in itself is a spectrum. It's not a black and white kind of thing, because what may be perfectly rational and sound to me may be a little bit irrational to somebody else. So we're just going to talk about the concepts, but not necessarily look at this as a tool to judge. We're going to take a bit deeper an analysis of the grades of fear and how to evaluate it within ourselves in a bit. So rational fear is a fear of something that presents an obvious risk or danger to our well-being. Another way to call it is like a healthy or grounded fear. Now, what do you see as some examples of a rational fear? If you wouldn't mind sharing just a few examples. What do you think there could be that's a rational fear?
Fear of like not putting hand in fire.
Ah, okay. So there's a fear of pain, which would result in us not putting our hand in fire. Yeah, so that's a good example, Vedant, of a rational fear. I don't want to expose myself to pain. I'm afraid of pain. And so I'm not going to stick my hand in fire. That's a very rational way of addressing that type of a fear. There are people out there who their bodies don't have the capacity to feel pain. And so that presents problems. So in a way, then that fear of pain is a very practical safeguard to self-harm. So that's a really nice point. What else do you see as a rational fear? If a tiger comes running at you, is that a rational fear?
Yes. No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially if there's no barrier. Yes, definitely. And so to contrast that with irrational fear, it's a fear of something that has no bearing on our health or well-being, or the reaction to it is paralyzing and disproportionate to the apparent risk that it presents. So Vedant, to use your fire example, let's say I could have a fear of fire, and it could go into the realm of irrational if, for example, I will not set foot inside a house that has a fireplace. I'm just giving an extreme example. Or I will insist that nobody lights a candle when I'm in the room, or things like that. So it's not the actual fear itself that can be classified as rational or irrational. It's actually how do we perceive and act on that identified risk. Does that make sense? So like if I have a fear of tigers, I live in Chicago, and the nearest tiger is in a zoo far, far away from me. But I still walk out the door and look both ways to make sure a tiger's not coming at me. Does that make sense?
Yes.
We get a sense of safetyness, like.
Yeah, yeah. Being able to make a distinction between what warrants fear and what doesn't, in a way that allows us to function. So yeah, that's right. It just reminded me. I had a friend in college who had this fear of sinkholes. That he would sometimes go on a bit of a crusade about how sinkholes were the great problem that nobody really talks about, and had this fear of the ground just opening up underneath him and swallowing him up. And so I guess in retrospect, I don't know how serious he was when he would share this as a source of anxiety, but that's an example because sinkholes are very rare, and it's generally not something that somebody would have as top of mind, just given that they're very rare, not prone, especially here in Chicago. It doesn't happen that much. Potholes, yes, but sinkholes, not so much. Now, just wanting to get your opinion, do you see a fear of death as rational or irrational?
I guess rational.
Irrational, yeah, even I think.
Okay, why do you say that?
We know someday it will come.
So if you know it's going to come, why do you fear it? And we can explore this idea in a little bit as well, but I just wanted to get some thoughts on that. That going back to the point, it's not the object of fear in itself that is rational or irrational, but how we act on it. I'm in my approaching mid-30s now, and there is some awareness that, yeah, death happens to all of us. But I'm not going to Costco shopping for my coffin right now. And I'm not making plans or taking steps with the expectation that it will happen anytime soon. Of course, it could happen. It could happen today or tomorrow, who knows when. But I'm not going through my existence constantly meditating on that as a point of fear, as a limiting concern, top of mind kind of thing. But let's explore that in a little bit, especially like if we know that it's coming and there's nothing we can do to stop it, what is that fear then? Is the fear really death, or is it something else? So the things that we're afraid of can be grouped very loosely into different categories. Like there's fears of the natural environment, lightning, tornadoes, earthquakes, fears related to animals. I don't want to be in the same room as a dog. They have sharp teeth and they can bite. Fears related to medical treatments or issues. I don't want to undergo surgery. I don't want to be in medication. I don't want my wisdom teeth pulled, whatever it might be. Fears related to specific situations. What if I'm not good enough to get that promotion? What if I didn't try hard enough? What if I'm just not meant to succeed? That's scary. And so I want to take us a little bit now deeper in the causes of fear. So just what really is the catalyst that results in fear in general? And what do you think causes fear? Like just to get some ideas out there. Well, self-preservation start. What do you think, Vaishali?
Uncertainty.
Uncertainty. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense, because with uncertainty, like, what is it about uncertainty though?
Like sometimes, for example, we mostly, like, for at least in my case, like in my childhood, I don't remember recent things like I was so much fearful as such. But like some incidences happened and I was like, okay, again it will happen, and something like that maybe. Or we never know when,
Situation.
like, yeah, situation based.
So you're saying a certain situation in your past unfolded a certain way, which it sounds like probably wasn't the desired outcome. And so you're saying that that uncertainty generated by that past experience lends itself to anxiety or fear in the present.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Like not that much intensity, but like, yeah, like it's there. It's not like it's totally gone.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. And hold on to that, because I think that'll be useful a little bit later as well. We're going to do a little bit of an exercise related to some things like that, what you're sharing. So yes, uncertainty. And closely related to uncertainty, I'm just thinking about what you're saying, Vaishali, there's also a certain degree of an expectation or an attachment in the sense of like, things need to be a certain way in order for me to avoid this fearful situation, or in order for me to feel happy or content or peaceful or whatever it might be. And anything else than that situation, which I envision in my mind, is a source of fear, and closely related to fear is anxiety. And I just want to share a story which helps illustrate this concept a little bit. So there's a story of a man who owned a very beautiful house. We'll just say it was the most beautiful house in town. And the time had come where he was getting older, so he thought, okay, it's time for me to sell it. And so he asked one of his sons to help him sell the house. And several weeks later, the son came back and said, "Great news! I've entered an agreement, and we're going to be selling the house." And later on that night, the beautiful house set on fire. And so this man, because he hadn't sold the house yet, he started crying, just thinking, "Oh no, I needed that money to be able to fund part of my retirement. What am I going to do now?" And he was filled with despair as well as fear and uncertainty over his future. And then the son who had sold the house comforted him, saying, "No, actually, the new owner just heard, or the soon-to-be owner just heard what happened, and he's an honest man, so he thought, well, I already agreed to buy it, so I'm still going to buy it regardless, and then I guess I'll just get the insurance claim or whatever it is." And so immediately, the person who was selling the house, all that fear just went away. All that uncertainty about his future just went away. What changed? The house is still on fire, but what changed?
The outcome.
In the sense that he was still selling the house and the deal was going to go through, yes, that changed. But what else changed, though? He wasn't sad that the house was burning down. He was only sad about and fearful about the change in his situation because he was identifying with that house as his property. But as soon as that attachment was gone, because, well, it's not mine, it's just now somebody else's house burning down, the fear left him. And so that illustrates the point that there are types of fear many of us experience that just relate to me identifying with certain things as mine, seeing it as mine to possess forever. Not understanding that if we accept, and we had talked about this earlier, that death is inevitable, then what is the attachment to a certain living situation? What is that attachment to the degree that we become consumed by fear of losing that? Even though we go into any situation knowing it's going to end, knowing we're going to lose everything at the time of death, and that nothing can stop it or save us from that. And so just seeing everything as transient, that we're just borrowing things. And like we stay in an Airbnb or a hotel or the dorm, we're there for some time. We can keep a spirit of gratitude that it's there, that facility is there for us, but knowing full well that we're not going to be there forever. And likewise, these things, these experiences, even these memories aren't going to be here forever. And so just part of that embracing fear, so overcoming fear by embracing it, is developing a healthy relationship with the stuff, the dreams, the aspirations in our life. Not saying we shouldn't have dreams and aspirations, but again, always keeping the perspective that it's a temporary situation. And related to this mindset shift is also having a healthy skepticism for the mind's ability to predict our future. I know in several sessions ago, I'd asked the question, how many of us have failed an exam? And all of us said, yes, it has happened, as shocking as it may seem. And what was that feeling in failing an exam? thoughts perhaps of, there's no way I'm going to get into the college I want to. The doors are closing on all these dreams for a future career. I'm never going to get into a top tier company. I'm not going to be able to afford a comfortable lifestyle that I'd always imagined. Whatever it might be. But one thing I've seen, and if you'd like to share your perspective on this as well, is that the mind is usually a pretty terrible fortune teller. That the mind has the ability to take a fear, a sensitivity, an attachment, and just amplify it so much that soon it becomes the only thing that feels real. It becomes the pivotal moment in my life. And it's kind of interesting because going back to the who am I discussion, that I am an eternal soul in this changing body, but the sense of I, that self, doesn't change. The quality of that soul, it's full of knowledge, it's eternal, and it's full of happiness. And those three qualities, eternal, everything has an expiration date, there's death, stuff degrades. This world is not built for the nature of the soul. We don't like to see things come to an end. Growing up, whenever I would see on the news these natural disasters that happen in some parts, at some point in any part of the world, one common thing which always struck me as very interesting is, let's say there's a coastal community that gets periodically flooded and completely destroyed. And shortly after the devastation occurs, the newscasters interview some local residents, and more often than not, there's always a quote from some leader saying, "We will rebuild. The storm will not crush the people of fill in the blank of where we are right now." Even though if these devastating storms are happening once every 10 years, every 20 years, every 30 years, and you have to keep rebuilding, in one sense, it has the perspective of lunacy, because you're going into a situation expecting it to last forever, even though history is proving that it's not going to last forever. And so as souls, we don't like to confront with the inevitable destruction of everything around us. It's not comfortable because it's not natural. And so when we feel fear, there's also, in addition to the alert or alarm that something's not right, there's the perspective that there's an impending pain or loss and that nobody can help me. If I have a sense of shelter meaning something that gives me protection, that acts as an insulator against a fearful situation. So it's a source of comfort or security. It's a collection of things that I can rely on when the going gets tough. But if that shelter is failing me, that's also when I experience fear. So let's think about this idea of shelter, because again, shelter, protection. And I'm going to say a few statements, and I would like it if you both can share what you think that shelter is in the statement that got violated. So I'll do the first one as an example. The statement is, "I'm afraid of living alone." And that fear could be a violation of a shelter that I have of other people are always there to protect me, or I feel a sense of security and protection when other people are around me. I do not feel secure in the ability to protect myself. Just one example. You could take that same statement and come up with another shelter, but that just illustrates the point. So the next statement, and I'd like you to give your thoughts on what that shelter that was violated is. I'm afraid of not being seen as successful. What shelter do you think was violated in that statement? I'm afraid of not being seen as successful.
Mm,
There's no penalty for guessing.
like people will not respect me in the same way and all. Like respect, maybe.
Okay, so being perceived as someone worthy of respect as a shelter, as something to take solace. Yeah, that's a really nice point. Okay, next statement. I'm afraid that if I'm honest, she will leave me. What
Fear of,
huh?
yeah, fear of losing then, like
Okay.
losing friendship or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. The shelter, the comfort that that relationship was bringing this person, yeah. I'm afraid of losing my house. And that's the last one. It could just be that I see my wealth as a shelter, as a protection against bad things happening in this world to me. But you get the idea, Vedant, this is clear?
Yeah, it is clear, but I was thinking that took a lot of time.
Oh, okay. And yeah, if this is a different way of looking at it, yeah, it can take a little bit of just consideration or getting into that mindset of, because one of the things that's interesting about fear is there's usually layers of fear, that what we may express as a source of fear may actually have elements in a common space. And understanding how this fear relates to where we take solace, where we go when the going gets tough, is helpful to inform. Because, for example, if I identify that a lot of my, we'll call them surface level fears, relate to the perception of money or status or respect or whatever else it may be as sources of fear, then that gives me a pretty good clue that that's something to look out for. Because the interesting thing is, if I don't dedicate the time and effort to understanding these roots of fear, then what does it do? It just perpetuates the cycle of me putting myself in situations that elicit further fear. And so part of embracing fear is also learning how to just see it, to recognize it, and in a healthy way, embrace it. Because it's always going to be there. And so with these responses to fear, we're talking about burying it, running away, freezing, or panic. We'll just explore these in a little bit. And the way to classify it, so freezing and panicking, those are short-term responses. Let's say we go back to that 20-second video where that, I don't know what it was, like some zombie goblin thingy just showed up. If I just freezed or panicked, okay, that makes sense for the initial reaction. What about 5 minutes from now? Would I still be freezing and panicking about that? Probably not. Although the act of freezing or panicking can have very real consequences. So a couple of things. One is There are sometimes reports of people who suspect an intruder is breaking into their home. And so they happen to have a gun or another firearm in the house, they pull it out and they shoot the intruder only to learn that it was a family member. So that panic, that fearful situation blinded that individual to, in a more objective way, assessing the situation. And of course, nothing clears a good panic like regret. And then just a story that I experienced in especially that panic side of things is in high school, we had different units in our gym class, and I specifically remember the wrestling unit because I particularly hated it. And one thing that our gym teacher had us do is pair up according to relative sizing and fight. I'm not the most athletically inclined. And the person I was wrestling against was on the wrestling team. So going into that, I already knew how it was going to end, and I was not excited. And so very quickly, he got me in a position where he lifted me in the air, and I just freaked out. My arms just started flailing. I lost any sense of clear thought. And so the only thing I could think to do, because I thought, oh God, he's going to throw me on the ground, I just grabbed his sleeve. And in my panic of moving my arm, I ripped his sleeve off of his gym t-shirt, and he'd just gently put me on the ground. And what he got in return for thanks was a ripped shirt. So that was a little embarrassing, but it made a very powerful impression on me. A few things that I took away from that. One, responding in a panicked way usually doesn't lead to the best outcomes. And two, my mind amplified the risk of that situation, resulting in me reacting in that way. When the reality turned out to be far softer, far gentler than what I had anticipated. And then the freezing side, something could just be so shocking or fearful that we literally just freeze up. I don't know what to do. And then just get stuck in that space. Now, burying the fear or running away from the fear are what can be called longer term responses. So let's say I had some kind of traumatic event in my life. Bury it. No, it doesn't affect me. Yeah, I'm fine, I'm over it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that event has passed, that that source of fear has gone. Burial just means I'm not acknowledging it. It's like throwing garbage on our front door. I may not see it when I'm walking in the house, but it's always there. And then flight from fear means avoiding the fear, whether it be justified or not. And so I'm just going to put my fingers in my ears and just pretend it's not there. So as an example, like we'll use a very extreme example of if I'm going to deny the problems. It's like having a smoke alarm in our house. And I hear the alarm going off. I might see smoke and I just think, I can't deal with this right now. And so I just take the batteries out of the smoke alarm and go back to bed. Problem solved? So what happens if I avoid the problem or just deny its existence? What happens in that situation of the house is starting to be on fire and I just remove the alarm?
It will exaggerate and maybe he himself will die in that fire.
Yeah, it gets a lot worse. There becomes a lot more to fear than just the symptom of the alarm or something that might be a smaller controlled blaze. Yeah, that's right. And so it's an extreme example, but it's illustrating the point that ignoring or avoiding sources of fear can lead to an amplification of that situation until there comes a point where that fear becomes true because we ignored it. We didn't embrace it. We just pretended like it'll go away on its own, and that usually doesn't happen. And even just in the realm of relationships, I'm afraid of, going back to that statement, I'm afraid that if I'm honest, she will leave me or he will leave me or whatever it might be. What happens when, let's say, two people are in a committed relationship, or let's say there are two very close friends, and one of them feels that there is a problem, but doesn't say anything because he or she is afraid of what might happen? What usually happens when there's that kind of a situation? Does the relationship get better? It always can act as a block. That if I'm really committed to being the best friend I can be, the best partner I can be, then there's always going to be a but in the back of my mind. And that leads to obstacles, to divisions, to a whole host of other problems that naturally arise because of this unspoken fear that if I say something about this actual root situation, it's going to spoil what I have. So part of this embracing fear is, again, to actually see that fear and not just be overcome by it, but actually to thoughtfully consider. And let's talk about interpersonal relationships. If I have this fear in the back of my mind, what's going to be worse? Always having that doubt in the back of my mind and having a reduced quality relationship, or taking that risk and living and acting in an honest way? Because one of the things about these unspoken, let's say, challenges in relationships is they always manifest in different ways. There's kind of a joke that that there might be an argument, let's say, between a husband and wife that starts out as something very trivial, and then suddenly it turns into this big event that may have happened previously, which had nothing to do with the original complaint or source of the disagreement. And that's just exemplifying that if these problems are not faced, they're not addressed, they're not communicated and clarified, if we don't overcome that fear of potentially losing what we have, okay, we won't lose what we have if we hold on to that fear, but what's the quality of what we have? What's the quality of that relationship? If somebody that I commit to, if I can't be honest with them. So that fear is really not doing myself a favor, it's not doing the other person a favor, and it's actually getting in the way of experiencing a higher quality of a relationship. Because the reality is, again, going back to the point, the mind has a tendency of amplifying. And so we can look at fear as a catalyst. So there's the run away, there's the bury it, there's the freezing, the panic, or we could see it as an opportunity for growth. And so there might be some overwhelming, fearful situation. An example is going into an exam unprepared, or procrastinating on a major assignment to the point of struggling to figure out how can I possibly get all this together in time, and just full on panic. Sure, there's full on panic. I can freeze, I can just say, what's the point? Or I can look at it proactively. What can I take away from this situation? How can I use this as an opportunity to grow? Maybe it'll force me to perform the project in a more efficient way. Maybe it'll force me to become more, or encourage, I shouldn't say force, encourage me to become more disciplined in my study habits. And part of the importance in understanding what to do with that fear as a catalyst is just asking myself the simple question, is there anything I can do with this fear or not? Going back to the earlier discussion of death, I can't do anything to avoid it. And so just asking, what is it then that I'm really fearful of? Just knowing that it's all going to end. But there is the question of poor health. If I'm afraid because a doctor said that I'm in poor health, I can do something about it. I can make certain lifestyle choices that can improve my quality of health so that that fear acts as a positive catalyst rather than something that brings us down. And one way to look at these sources of fear also is that it is an opportunity to become stronger. And one thing I love is gardening. I love growing plants. I have since I was a small boy. And one thing that I saw is we had grow lights because we'd always start our seeds. It gets cold in Chicago, and so we'd always want to get a head start on the growing season by growing seeds inside. So we had special lights for that. And one thing I noticed is I quickly didn't like the idea of starting seeds indoors before the growing season because those plants were always weaker than the ones that I started directly outside, primarily because of the wind. So we can see wind as something that beats against plants, forces them to bend, may even break some stems or branches or whatever it might be. But the quality of wind makes those plants stronger, more resilient. They ultimately grow better than the plants that just stay inside in a very comfortable life, a comfortable atmosphere where there is no movement. And we can look at that as an allegory that these sources of fear or fearful situations that we find ourselves in are an opportunity to grow. Wow, that was really scary, but I had no idea that I had what it took within me to get over it, to overcome that fear or that fearful situation. And so I'm going to ask you both just to do a quick exercise. Now, I want you all to think back to a great moment in your life. Okay? Are you both there? Are you seeing it? Are you feeling it? Okay. Maybe you got that scholarship you worked hard for, or the score you wanted on that important exam, an award, a coveted internship. Now, thinking about that success, I'm going to ask you to look a little bit backwards. What did it take to get that point? Were there times of fear, of uncertainty, that ultimately led to that moment? Were there struggles that you experienced before that joyful moment manifested? What do you think, Vedant?
Yeah, there are struggles and hardships before the achievements.
Vaishali, same thing?
Yeah, like it's always there. Like nothing is easy.
Good. And so I'm guessing, because we all have our own struggles and challenges and sources of fear right now as well. Like it's just part of life. And so one thing that we can do also to embrace fear, we can conquer fear by embracing it, is by understanding that these sources of fear today are tomorrow's success. Seeing it in the context as helping me to become a stronger individual if we allow it. Fear can also be debilitating if we allow it. And so what we do have is that element of choice of how to respond to the fear. Do we bury it? Do we avoid it? Or do we embrace it? And facing that fear, embracing that fear, means getting clarity on what is a rational versus irrational fear. Like, oh yeah, I'm a pro at handling fear now. I'm not, but I'm just saying as an example. And so I can have a clear sense of these are things that actually are a legit source of fear. And these are fears that are constructed in my mind, the irrational fear. We have more confidence in the ability to handle situations. And we can start to then get a clearer sense of what is this root of fear. And one exercise that I'd like to talk about with respect to facing the fear, it's just going to take a couple minutes. And I'd like you all to get a pen and paper if you can. and just write down a fear. And then if you could just indicate when you've done that, when you've just written down a fear that you have, and you don't have to share what that is. And if you think there is nothing I'm afraid of, think a little deeper. Okay. And once you have that fear down, just ask yourself the question, why? And write that down. And then after you've done that, ask yourself why again, and dig a little deeper. And repeat that exercise until you'll recognize the moment of aha, where it's no longer, where it's like you've reached the core of it. And start to see that in relation to maybe other areas of fear in our lives. And so this may take much longer than this session, but I encourage you to really meditate on this, to understand what's driving these fears in our lives. And so when we can recognize the root of these fears that we may have in our lives, when we know the root, we can learn to recognize it in different situations and see it rather than be consumed by it. So I can know that, for example, one fear that I have in my life, which I think is a pretty core one, is that I work very hard not to be like a certain somebody in my life. I'm not going to share, but and I've realized that that drives a lot of my interactions, both personally and professionally. And so just starting to see it means acknowledging this person as an influence in my life, but I am not that person. And so that statement of affirmation, that recognition, helps me to curb, let's say, ways that I'd manifest it, which may not be healthy. And so I encourage everyone also to try that exercise because it can be extremely illuminating. And it's, again, not something that necessarily will just come like, oh, let me get a pen and paper and sit down for 5 minutes. It could just be a prolonged meditation and it'll just hit you one day. But it's definitely worth investing that mental effort to understand about ourselves. And tied to this idea of facing the fear is understanding we're not alone. So going back to the idea of the protection, the shelter, part of this goal of the Vedic Vision Society is to understand how there actually is a shelter that doesn't fail us, that can't be taken away. And it's the difference between the isolated person facing the world versus somebody that has a whole army at his back. And so we can even just think back to the qualities of the soul that we had talked about in the Who Am I discussion, that the soul can't be touched by fire, moistened by water, dried by the wind. It has no beginning and no end, it's eternal. It can't be broken or divided. So the soul literally is eternal and untouchable. And so this process of bhakti yoga, yoga meaning to connect with the Supreme, connect with God, connect with Krishna, it helps us connect to that higher way of thinking so that ultimately we can recognize this fear as a reality of the soul being in this body. But at the same time, this is not the end all be all of our existence, that there's something much greater than us supporting us as long as we allow ourselves to accept that kind of help and that protection. And so I'm going to leave us with that. And as a transition, next week we'll be doing a session on meditation. So I want to thank you both I want to thank you all for joining, and just see if there's any other points that you wanted to raise or discuss. Otherwise, we'll conclude for the week.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Okay, I have one question. So, like for me, that fear is not that much like intensity for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But for my mother, it's there. Like I see her anxiety in some situations. Like it comes out in different situations. Actually, not the exactly same, but
Mm-hmm.
so I don't know how to handle that because for me it's almost gone, but I don't feel that from her mind it's gone because I'm sure that it's definitely not there, or but she is having like that fear always, like in sense of protection maybe for us, or like for my sister or brother maybe. So it's she is always having that fear of like someone will harm us kind of.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to handle that because I have seen recently it's there.
Mm-hmm.
Though nothing is happening as such, like not that big, of course. But some or other thing if happens, it's always her mindset is okay. It's again somebody is harming us or something like that. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So
I guess not really understanding the specifics, because it sounds like what you're sharing is very personal,
yeah.
but just general principles. One is ultimately we are the captain of our own ship. So while we can do our best to be a source of comfort for those that may be expressing fear, that there's ultimately nothing that I can do or you can do to eliminate that fear, that it really is something that needs to come from within.
Yeah, that's what I feel because yeah, like I what like it doesn't sound like okay chant because she is chanting regularly, but I don't know how to, like I cannot like give her that comfort of whatever I am feeling now. Like I don't know how to deal with it. Like it's not regularly, of course, but it's suddenly it comes out. I see that.
One thing that the nice thing about, you brought up chanting, and we'll talk a little bit about this next time with the meditation as well, is that with meditation, there's no holding back in terms of what kinds of feelings we can bring into the meditation.
Hmm.
And so if there is a feeling of fear, we just bring that into the meditation, and that can quickly turn into a desperate cry for help.
Mm-hmm.
So really, there's no feeling that's off the table when we
Mm-hmm.
talk about meditation. In
Mm-hmm.
terms of just what we can do, just be human,
Mm-hmm.
listen. Um, you know, we can share, but at the end of the day, it is something that is just a very individual journey for all of us, really,
Yeah.
to understand how to process it, and always just acting from a platform of love,
Mm.
compassion, and also understanding that this person's fear is their own, and it shouldn't be, let's say, like a guiding force in my life.
Mm.
Because let's look at some of the side effects. If I have a close relationship with somebody and they have a fear and say, don't do this, always do this,
Mm.
that's where the faculty of discrimination comes in for us. we need to evaluate how does that relate to how I see the world, how I understand risks or sources of fear. How can I act in that relationship while still asserting myself as an individual? Because if I lose that element of asserting myself as an individual and it's always somebody imposing their ideas on me, ultimately that leads to resentment. That block in the relationship where, okay, let's say, so-and-so doesn't like it when I do something, but that something means a lot to me. Well, I won't tell them when I'm doing that something. That's a block in the relationship right there.
Yeah.
Is that what you were, I guess, looking for with that question?
Yeah, like I don't know, because I am feeling very sad when I see she is in that much anxiety and I am not able to do anything as such.
Yeah. Maybe you're just hearing her is a lot though.
Yeah.
If it wasn't doing anything for her, she wouldn't keep telling you.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Sure, of course. Vedant, anything? Otherwise, we'll conclude for today.
Nothing, Praj.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for joining. Midterms are coming up soon. Already happening.
Done. This week, last week itself it's done, but few undergrads are having like even this week.
Oh, okay. Wow.
That's why that Shivi is not joining. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
Next week maybe. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, next week we'll talk about meditation. So it's how can we better align ourselves with a higher plane of acting with the world. Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day, great week, and we'll talk soon. Bye.